The stars looked cold and distant through the bridge windows of the exploration ship Horizon's Edge. Captain Jake Morrison stood with his hands behind his back, watching the endless void of space. His crew had been out here for 6 months now, making contact with new alien races and building peaceful relationships across the galaxy. It was good work, important work, but sometimes Jake missed the simple blue skies of Earth. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her communications station, monitoring the standard channels for any distress signals or first contact opportunities. The soft beeping of her equipment created a steady rhythm that had become background music to their daily operations. Amy had joined the crew 2 years ago, fresh out of the academy, and had quickly proven herself to be one of the best communications officers in the fleet. The routine morning was suddenly broken when Amy's console erupted in urgent alarms. Her fingers flew across the controls as she tried to isolate the source of the incoming signal. The transmission was weak and filled with static, but it was definitely a human distress beacon. "Captain, I'm picking up an emergency signal from the Kepler system," Amy called out, her voice tense with concentration. "It's from the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The signal is badly damaged, but I'm getting fragments about missing people and unknown vessels." Jake moved quickly to her station, leaning over her shoulder to study the readouts. The colony on Kepler 442b was a small settlement, maybe 300 people total, mostly families who had volunteered to help extract rare minerals from the planet's crust. It was supposed to be safe, far from any known hostile territories. "Can you clean up the signal?" Jake asked. Amy worked for several minutes, running the transmission through various filters and enhancement protocols. Slowly, words began to emerge from the static. The voice was male, older, speaking with the flat accent of someone who had spent too many years on frontier worlds. "This is Administrator Hayes on Kepler 442b, requesting immediate assistance. Unknown alien vessels landed 3 days ago. They took 37 of our children. Repeat, 37 children have been taken by unknown aliens. They claim to be conducting research and promise to return them in 1 month. We need help immediately." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. Children. Someone had taken children. "Set course for Kepler 442b, maximum speed," Jake ordered. "Amy, send a priority message to Fleet Command. Let them know what we found." The Horizon's Edge changed direction smoothly, its powerful engines pushing the ship toward the Kepler system. The journey would take 18 hours at their top speed. 18 hours during which Jake could only imagine what those children might be going through. Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's xenobiologist, arrived on the bridge within minutes of hearing the news. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair, who had spent most of her career studying alien cultures. Lisa had seen many strange things during her years in space, but the idea of aliens taking human children made her feel sick. "Do we have any information about what species might be responsible?" Lisa asked. "Nothing yet," Jake replied. "The signal mentioned unknown vessels. We'll know more when we reach the colony." The hours passed slowly. Jake found himself pacing the bridge, unable to concentrate on routine reports or maintenance schedules. His own daughter was safe back on Earth, attending university and probably complaining about her boring literature classes. But she was safe, and that was all that mattered. When the Horizon's Edge finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, the planet looked peaceful and normal. There were no signs of alien ships or orbital battles. The colony's main settlement appeared intact from their long-range scans. Jake ordered the ship to approach carefully, all sensors active and weapon systems on standby. They had no idea if the aliens were still in the area or what their intentions might be. The shuttle bay doors opened 20 minutes later, and Jake led a small team down to the planet's surface. The colony was built in a valley surrounded by low hills, with the main administrative buildings at the center and family housing spreading out in neat rows. Everything looked normal except for one important detail. There were no children anywhere to be seen. Administrator Ben Hayes met them at the landing pad. He was a tall man in his 50s with weathered hands and tired eyes. Jake could see immediately that Hayes had not slept in days. "Thank you for coming so quickly," Hayes said, shaking Jake's hand with obvious relief. "I wasn't sure if anyone would receive our message." "Tell us exactly what happened," Jake said. Hayes led them through the colony's main street toward the school building. The empty playground equipment looked especially sad without any children using it. Swings moved slowly in the morning breeze, and a half-finished hopscotch court remained abandoned in the dirt. 3 days ago, just after breakfast, these ships appeared in the sky. Hayes began. Nothing like I'd ever seen before. All curves and smooth surfaces like they were grown instead of built. They landed right here in the center of town. He pointed to several large circular marks in the ground where the grass had been burned away. The beings that came out were tall and thin, with skin that looked like crystal. They could speak our language, but their voices sounded like music instead of words. They called themselves Zephyrians and said they were researchers from the Galactic Scientific Collective. Jake exchanged a look with Dr. Park. Neither of them had heard of this species before. At first, they seemed friendly enough, Hayes continued. They asked questions about our colony, our way of life, our families. Then they started asking specifically about the children, how many we had, what ages, how they spent their days. They reached the school building, a simple structure with bright yellow walls and large windows designed to let in plenty of natural light. Hayes pushed open the front door, and they walked through empty classrooms filled with abandoned books and half-finished art projects. That's when things went wrong, Hayes said, his voice breaking slightly. They said they needed to conduct behavioral studies on human juveniles. They promised the children would be safe and would be returned within a standard galactic month. Before we could object or argue, they used some kind of stunning device on all the adults. Jake felt anger building in his chest. The idea of someone using weapons on parents to steal their children was almost too horrible to imagine. When we woke up, the children were gone, Hayes finished. All of them. From 6-year-old Emma Collins to 16-year-old Peter Nash. 37 kids just vanished. Dr. Park had been examining some equipment left behind in one of the classrooms. The devices were clearly alien in origin, with smooth surfaces and no visible controls or displays. These appear to be neural scanning devices, she said quietly. Very sophisticated ones. If I had to guess, I'd say they're designed to study brain patterns and emotional responses. Jake stared at the alien equipment and felt something dangerous stirring in his mind. Someone had come to this peaceful colony and stolen children for experiments. That was not something he could forgive or forget. Do you have any idea where they went? He asked Hayes. They mentioned their homeworld, but I've never heard of it. Something about a crystal planet near the Vega sector. Jake activated his communicator. Amy, get me a full scan of this area. I want to know everything about these ships and where they might have gone. Then contact Fleet Command again. Tell them we need backup and tell them why. As his crew began their investigation, Jake stood in the empty school and made a silent promise. Somewhere out there, 37 human children were frightened and alone. But not for long. He was going to find them and bring them home no matter what it took. The horizon's edge moved through space like a hunting wolf, following the energy trail left by the alien ships. Dr. Lisa Park had worked for 3 days straight to decode the unique signature of the Zephyrian vessels, and now they finally had a destination. The crystal planet orbited a binary star system in the outer reaches of the Vega sector, just as Administrator Hayes had remembered. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the strange world grow larger on their main screen. The planet's surface sparkled like a giant jewel, covered in what appeared to be massive crystal formations that reached up toward the sky like frozen lightning. 2 suns cast rainbow patterns across the surface, creating a display of light that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Impressive civilization, Lieutenant Amy Carter observed from her communication station. I'm reading massive energy signatures from those crystal structures. They're not just decorative, they're some kind of advanced technology. Jake nodded but felt no appreciation for the alien architecture. Somewhere on that glittering world or its moons, 37 human children were being held prisoner. Every hour that passed was another hour those kids spent afraid and alone, wondering if anyone was coming to save them. Any response to our hail? Jake asked. Yes, sir, they're directing us to approach the main crystal complex on the northern continent. They seem willing to talk, which is something, I suppose. Commander Kate Sullivan arrived on the bridge wearing her formal diplomatic uniform. She was Jake's best negotiator, a woman who could keep her temper even in the most frustrating situations. If anyone could convince the Zephyrians to return the children peacefully, it would be Kate. I've reviewed everything we know about their species, Kate said, holding a data tablet. The Zephyrians are members of something called the Galactic Scientific Collective. They're known for being extremely advanced but also completely emotionless. They view everything through the lens of scientific study. That doesn't sound promising for getting the kids back, Jake replied. Maybe not, but it means they probably haven't hurt them. To the Zephyrians, the children are valuable research subjects. They'll want to keep them healthy and functional. Jake felt only slightly better about that information. The idea of children being treated like lab rats still made his blood boil, even if it meant they were relatively safe. The horizon's edge entered the planet's atmosphere and descended toward the designated landing area. Up close, the crystal formations were even more impressive and alien. They seemed to grow out of the ground in organic shapes, but their surfaces were perfectly smooth and geometric. Lights pulsed through them in patterns that hurt to look at directly. A delegation of Zephyrians waited for them at the landing platform. Jake's first sight of the aliens confirmed Hayes' description perfectly. They were tall and thin, almost 7 feet in height, with skin that looked like it was made of living crystal. Their faces were angular and sharp, with large eyes that glowed with internal light. When they moved, their skin caught and reflected the light from their twin suns. "Welcome to Zephyria Prime," one of them said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. The universal translator in Jake's ear converted the musical tones into words, but the alien quality remained. "I am High Researcher Veltharos. We have been expecting you." Kate stepped forward as the designated speaker. "I'm Commander Sullivan of the human exploration vessel Horizon's Edge. We're here about the children you took from Kepler 442b. "Ah, yes. The juvenile specimens," Veltharos replied with what might have been satisfaction. "They are quite fascinating. We had no idea that human emotional development was so complex during the pre-adult phases." Jake felt his hands clench into fists. The casual way the alien referred to children as specimens made him want to grab the crystalline being by his thin neck. Only Kate's warning glance kept him quiet. "Those children have families who are worried sick about them," Kate said, keeping her voice level. "They need to be returned immediately." Veltharos tilted his head in a gesture that somehow managed to look both curious and condescending. "Worried sick? We are not familiar with this emotional state. Are the adult humans experiencing some form of illness?" "It's a figure of speech," Kate explained patiently. "The parents are extremely concerned about their children's safety and well-being. In human society, family bonds are very strong." "Interesting," Veltharos mused. "This emotional attachment phenomenon is exactly what we are studying. The juvenile specimens display remarkable behavioral patterns when separated from their breeding pairs. We had no idea such primitive responses could be so sophisticated." Jake took a step forward, but Kate raised her hand to stop him. She could see the danger building in his eyes, and diplomatic negotiations would not survive if the captain started a fight. "The children are not specimens," Kate said firmly. "They are sentient beings with rights and families. This kind of research without consent is considered a serious crime by galactic law." The Zephyrian made a sound that might have been laughter. "Galactic law is created by emotional species who let feelings cloud their judgment. The Galactic Scientific Collective operates under different principles. We study all forms of life to better understand the universe. These human juveniles represent an unprecedented opportunity." "Opportunity for what?" Kate demanded. "To understand how such a primitive species develop such complex emotional bonds," Veltharos explained. "Most races become less emotional as they evolve, but humans seem to have gone in the opposite direction. It defies all known patterns of development." Back on the ship, Chief Engineer Rick Barnes was conducting his own investigation. While the diplomatic team talked with the Zephyrians, Rick used the ship's advanced sensors to scan the entire star system. What he found made his stomach turn. "Captain," Rick's voice came through Jake's communicator. "I've located what appears to be a research facility on the planet's largest moon. It's heavily shielded and protected by automated defense systems. If I had to guess, that's where they're keeping the children." Jake felt a surge of both hope and anger. The kids were close, but they were being held in what sounded like a fortress. Getting them out was not going to be easy. Meanwhile, the conversation with Veltharos continued in the crystal chamber where they had been brought to meet with other members of the research collective. The building's interior was just as alien as its exterior, with floating platforms and walls that seemed to be made of solid light. "How long do you intend to keep the children?" Kate asked. "The study will require several more months of observation," another Zephyrian replied. This one introduced herself as researcher Zixandra. We must document their behavioral patterns through various stages of separation anxiety and adaptation. Several more months? Kate's diplomatic composure finally cracked slightly. Those children are 6 to 16 years old. They're terrified and confused. Every day you keep them is causing psychological damage. Psychological damage is an interesting concept, Zixandra said. We have observed that the specimens show remarkable resilience. They have formed protective groupings and appear to be adapting to their new environment quite well. Jake could not stay quiet any longer. They're not adapting, they're surviving. There's a difference. And they're not specimens, they're children with names and families and people who love them. Veltharo studied Jake with those glowing crystal eyes. You display the same emotional irrationality as the juvenile specimens. This attachment behavior appears to be consistent across all age groups in your species. It's not irrationality, Jake said, his voice growing harder. It's called being human. And if you think we're going to just walk away and let you experiment on our kids, you don't understand humans at all. Perhaps not, Beltheros admitted, but we intend to learn. The specimens will be returned when our research is complete, as promised. Until then, they are well cared for and in no danger. Kate and Jake exchanged looks. It was clear that reasoning with the Zephyrians was not going to work. They saw the children as nothing more than interesting animals to be studied, and no amount of explanation about human emotions or family bonds was going to change that. As they were escorted back to their ship, Jake activated his private communicator channel to Rick Barnes. Start scanning that moon facility in detail. I want to know everything about their defenses and how we might get inside. Already on it, Captain, Rick replied. But Jake, this isn't going to be easy. We're talking about a military-grade research installation. Jake looked up at the moon hanging in the alien sky above the Crystal City. Somewhere up there, children were crying for their parents and wondering if anyone cared enough to save them. I don't care how hard it is, Jake said quietly. Those kids are going home. Dr. Zixandra floated through the corridors of the Lunar Research Facility, her crystalline form casting rainbow patterns on the white walls as she moved. The station was a marvel of Zephyrian engineering, built into the moon's core and powered by the gravitational forces between the planet and its satellite. Every surface was smooth and sterile, designed for maximum efficiency and scientific observation. The facility contained dozens of observation chambers, each one carefully designed to study different aspects of sentient behavior. Most of the chambers currently held specimens from various species across the galaxy, but the newest additions were by far the most interesting. The human juveniles had been placed in the central wing, where the most advanced monitoring equipment could record their every action and emotion. Zixandra paused at the first observation window and looked down at the subjects below. The humans had been divided into several groups based on age and developmental stage, but they had quickly reorganized themselves in ways that fascinated the research team. Instead of staying in their assigned groupings, they had formed mixed-age clusters with older juveniles taking protective positions around the younger ones. In Chamber 7, 8-year-old Emma Collins sat in the center of a circle formed by 6 other children. Her blonde hair was tangled from sleeping on the hard floor, and her clothes were wrinkled, but her eyes remained bright and determined. She was telling a story to the younger children, something about brave knights and magical kingdoms that seemed to calm their fears. The princess knew she had to be strong, Emma said in her clear young voice, because all the other people in the kingdom were counting on her. Even though she was scared, she never let them see it. Zixandra made notes on her floating datapad. The way the juvenile specimens created fictional narratives to manage their emotional distress was unlike anything she had observed in other species. Most creatures simply adapted to their environment or fell into despair, but these humans seemed to be actively fighting against their circumstances through storytelling and group bonding. In Chamber 12, 14-year-old Peter Nash was conducting his own form of resistance. The boy had somehow managed to access one of the facility's maintenance panels and was attempting to understand the alien technology. His dark hair fell across his face as he worked with intense concentration, using a small piece of metal he had broken off his shoe to probe the circuitry. If I can figure out how their communication system works, Peter whispered to his roommates, maybe we can send a message to our parents. The other teenagers in his chamber gathered around him, offering encouragement and suggestions. Zixandra noted with interest that the older specimens seemed to understand that escape was unlikely, but they continued to work on the problem anyway. This persistence in the face of obvious futility was another uniquely human trait. Researcher Kethrios joined Zixandra at the observation post, his crystal skin pulsing with the soft blue light that indicated deep thought among their species. The behavioral patterns continue to surprise us, he said in their musical language. Most species show clear signs of adaptation by the 4th day of captivity. But these humans are not adapting, Zixandra replied. They are resisting adaptation. They maintain their emotional connections and continue to hope for rescue, even when logic suggests it is impossible. In Chamber 3, the youngest specimens were struggling the most with their separation from their breeding pairs. 6-year-old Tommy Chen cried himself to sleep every night, calling out for his mother in words that the universal translators could not properly convey. But even in his distress, the other children comforted him, taking turns holding his hand and singing soft songs until he fell asleep. The Zephyrian researchers had never seen anything like it. In their own species, juveniles were raised communally with no emotional attachments to specific adults. The idea of missing one's breeding pair was as foreign to them as the concept of pain would be to a being without nerve endings. The emotional bonds appear to transcend individual survival instincts, Kethrios observed. When Specimen Collins was offered additional food rations yesterday, she immediately distributed them among the younger subjects rather than consuming them herself. Zixandra reviewed the recordings from the previous day. Emma had indeed given away her extra meal without hesitation, ensuring that the 6-year-olds received larger portions. This self-sacrifice for the benefit of others was noted as highly unusual behavior. In their research logs, the facility's artificial intelligence system provided a constant stream of data about the specimen's vital signs, stress levels, and emotional states. The humans showed elevated cortisol levels consistent with fear and anxiety, but their resilience markers remained surprisingly high. Most species in similar circumstances showed steady psychological deterioration, but these juveniles seemed to be maintaining their mental stability through their social bonds. In Chamber 15, 12-year-old Katie Murphy had appointed herself as the group's teacher, organizing daily lessons to keep the children's minds active. She taught basic mathematics using scratches on the wall, led group exercises to maintain physical health, and even conducted singing sessions that could be heard throughout the facility. "We have to stay smart and strong," Katie told her fellow captives. "When our parents come to get us, we need to be ready to help them however we can." The absolute certainty in her voice that rescue would come puzzled the Zephyrian observers. The facility was located on a heavily defended moon, protected by energy shields and automated weapons systems. The chances of a successful rescue operation were mathematically insignificant, yet the specimens continued to believe it would happen. Veltharos arrived at the observation deck to review the daily progress reports. As the lead researcher on the project, he was most interested in the long-term psychological implications of the study. "Have we determined how long their emotional resilience can be maintained?" he asked. "That is what makes this study so valuable," Zixandra replied. Previous research suggested that all species have a breaking point where survival instincts override social bonds. But these humans continue to prioritize group welfare over individual comfort. They observed as 10-year-old Marcus Brown shared his blanket with a younger child who was shivering. The boy himself was obviously cold, but he seemed more concerned about the comfort of others than his own physical needs. This pattern repeated throughout all the observation chambers. The breeding pairs clearly invested significant resources in developing these behavioral patterns, Kethrios noted. The question is whether this represents an evolutionary advantage or a weakness that prevents optimal adaptation. What the Zephyrian researchers could not understand, despite all their advanced technology and scientific expertise, was that they were witnessing something that made humans unique in the galaxy: the children's refusal to abandon each other, their determination to maintain hope in hopeless circumstances, and their absolute faith that someone would come for them was not a weakness to be studied. It was the very thing that made humanity dangerous. On the planet below, Captain Morrison was receiving reports from his engineering team about the moon facility's defenses. The Zephyrians had built their research station assuming that logical species would calculate the odds of a successful assault and decide it was not worth the risk. They had made a fatal error in their calculations. They had assumed that humans were logical. Back in the facility, Emma Collins stood at the energy barrier that separated her chamber from the corridor beyond. Her small hand pressed against the invisible wall as she looked up at the observation windows where she somehow sensed the alien. Researchers were watching. "My daddy is coming for us," she said loudly enough for the monitoring systems to record. "He's really strong and really brave, and he won't stop until we're safe at home." Zixandra made another note in her research log about the specimen's continued belief in rescue, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. She filed it under irrational hope behaviors and marked it for further study. She had no way of knowing that hundreds of light years away, every human military installation in the galaxy was receiving emergency mobilization orders. The Third Fleet was moving towards Zephyrian space with orders to bring the children home by any means necessary. The researchers continued their observations, fascinated by the behavioral patterns they were documenting. They recorded the children's songs, their stories, their acts of kindness, and their refusal to give up hope. They measured their stress responses and cataloged their social interactions, but they never understood what they were really looking at. They were not observing the weakness of an emotional species. They were documenting the reason why humanity had spread across the galaxy, despite having no natural weapons or armor, no telepathic abilities or advanced technology. They were watching the power that made humans willing to fight impossible odds for each other. And very soon they were going to learn exactly how dangerous that power could be. The emergency meeting at Earth Command headquarters had been called for 0600 hours, but Admiral Frank Mitchell arrived an hour early. He sat alone in the vast conference room, staring at the holographic display that showed the positions of every human ship in the galaxy. The numbers were impressive on paper, but Frank had been a military man for 30 years, and he knew that numbers alone did not win wars. What won wars was the reason you were fighting. The conference room began, filling with the highest-ranking officers in the human fleet. General Patricia Hayes from the Marine Corps, Admiral Robert Chen from the Second Fleet, and a dozen other commanders who controlled the most powerful military forces humanity had ever assembled. But as they took their seats around the polished table, Frank noticed something different in their faces than he had seen in previous military conferences. There was anger there, the kind of cold fury that came from a line being crossed that should never have been crossed. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank began as soon as the last officer arrived, 6 hours ago we received confirmation that 37 human children have been taken from the Kepler 442b colony by an alien species calling themselves the Zephyrians. They are being held on a research facility for what the aliens describe as behavioral studies. The room erupted in voices as officers demanded details, asked questions, and made suggestions. Frank raised his hand for silence and continued speaking. Captain Morrison of the Horizon's Edge attempted diplomatic negotiations, but the aliens have refused to release the children. They claim the research will continue for several more months and that the children will be returned when the studies are complete. General Hayes leaned forward in her chair. "Several more months? These aliens think they can experiment on human children for months and will just wait patiently?" "That appears to be their assumption," Frank replied. According to Captain Morrison's reports, the Zephyrians seem to believe that logical species will calculate the odds of a military rescue and determine it is not worth the risk. Admiral Chen laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "They clearly don't understand humans very well." Frank activated the holographic display, showing the Zephyrian star system with detailed information about their defenses and military capabilities. The research facility is located on the primary moon of their homeworld. It's heavily shielded and protected by automated defense systems. The Zephyrians themselves appear to have advanced technology but limited military experience. "How limited?" General Hayes asked. "According to our intelligence files, they've never fought a war," Frank explained. "Their species evolved beyond physical conflict thousands of years ago. They use their technology for research and exploration, not warfare." The implications of this information settled over the room like a heavy blanket. The Zephyrians had taken human children believing they were dealing with just another logical species that would weigh costs and benefits before taking action. They had no idea what they had actually done. Captain Morrison's voice came through the communication system as he joined the meeting from his ship in Zephyrian space. "Admiral Mitchell, I need to make something clear. These children are scared, alone, and being treated like laboratory animals. Every hour we delay is another hour they suffer. Understood, Captain, Frank replied. How quickly can you gather intelligence on their defenses? My chief engineer has been scanning their facility for the past day. We have detailed information about their shields, weapons, and structural weaknesses. But Admiral, attempting this rescue with one ship would be suicide. Frank looked around the table at his fellow officers. How long would it take to assemble a proper task force? The question sparked immediate discussion as each commander calculated travel times, supply requirements, and logistical challenges. Admiral Chen was the first to provide an answer. If we strip every available ship from the second and third fleets, we could have a substantial force at the Zephyrian system within 72 hours. That's assuming we get immediate authorization from the Colonial Council. General Hayes added. Frank activated his personal communicator and connected to the Colonial Council chambers on Earth. The emergency session was already in progress, with representatives from every human colony and settlement participating via holographic links. Counselor Maria Santos, representing the outer colonies, was speaking when Frank's call came through. The question before us is not whether we should respond, but how quickly we can mobilize our forces. These are our children we're talking about, but we must consider the broader implications, argued Counselor David Kim from the Core Worlds. Military action against the Zephyrians could destabilize our relationships with other alien species. We've worked for decades to build peaceful alliances. Frank felt his patience wearing thin. Counselors with respect were not talking about a border dispute or a trade disagreement. Alien forces have invaded human territory, kidnapped human children, and are conducting experiments on them. There is no diplomatic solution to this situation. The debate continued for another hour, with some counselors advocating for continued negotiations and others demanding immediate military action. But as reports continued to arrive from Captain Morrison about the children's condition and the aliens' refusal to negotiate, the mood in the council chamber shifted decisively. The final vote was unanimous. Operation Homecoming was authorized with full military mobilization. Within 6 hours, every human naval base in the galaxy was buzzing with activity. Ships that had been scheduled for routine maintenance were rushed back into service. Crews on shore leave were recalled to active duty. Supply convoys began moving toward staging areas at the edge of human. Space Colonel Sarah Bennett received her orders while conducting training exercises with the Special Operations Unit on Mars. Her team was considered the best of the best, soldiers who specialized in impossible missions and hostile environment rescues. When she read the briefing about the kidnapped children, Sarah felt the same cold anger that was spreading through the entire human military. Listen up, she told her assembled troops in the briefing room. We have 37 children being held prisoner by aliens who think humans are just another species to be studied. Our job is to get those kids out alive and show these Zephyrians exactly what humans are capable of when someone threatens our young. The soldiers in the room came from different colonies, different backgrounds, and different military specialties. But they all had one thing in common. They understood that some lines could not be crossed. Taking children was one of those lines. Back at Earth Command, Admiral Mitchell was coordinating the largest military operation in human history. 12 heavy cruisers, 40 destroyers, and hundreds of support vessels were converging on the Zephyrian system. It was enough firepower to level a planet, but the mission parameters were clear. Rescue the children with minimal collateral damage. Admiral, his aide reported, we're receiving volunteers from civilian ships as well. Merchant vessels, private yachts, even some old mining ships are requesting permission to join the task force. Frank looked at the growing list of volunteers and shook his head in amazement. Word about the kidnapped children had spread through human space faster than official communications could travel. Parents, grandparents, and people who simply could not stand the thought of children being harmed were offering whatever help they could provide. Politely decline the civilian volunteers, Frank ordered, but make sure they know how much we appreciate the offer. Meanwhile, diplomatic messages were flooding in from other alien species throughout the galaxy. Most expressed concern about the escalating situation and offered to mediate between humans and Zephyrians. The Altarian ambassador arrived at Earth Command with a formal proposal for peaceful resolution. Ambassador Velshan was a tall, graceful being with flowing robes and the kind of ancient wisdom that came from thousands of years of successful diplomacy. He had prevented dozens of interspecies conflicts through patient negotiation and careful compromise. Admiral Mitchell, Velshan said in his soft, melodious voice. Surely this situation does not require such massive military action. The Zephyrians are not evil, merely misguided. Given time, I believe we can convince them to return the children voluntarily. Frank studied the alien diplomat with tired eyes. Ambassador, how many children do you have? Children? Velshan seemed confused by the question. My species reproduces through cellular division. We do not have offspring in the way that humans do. Then you don't understand, Frank replied simply. Those aren't just 37 random people being held prisoner. They're 37 futures, 37 hopes, 37 reasons why their parents get up every morning. And every hour they remain in that facility is another hour of trauma that may never heal. Velshan tried to argue that patience and diplomacy could resolve the crisis without bloodshed. But Frank had already made his decision. The task force would depart in 18 hours, with or without diplomatic approval from the Galactic Council. As news of the military mobilization spread, something unprecedented began happening throughout human space. Colony governors declared states of emergency. Planetary defense forces went to full alert. Civilian populations began organizing support networks for the families of the kidnapped children. The human fleet arrived at the edge of Zephyrian space like a storm front, moving across a peaceful sky. Admiral Frank Mitchell stood on the bridge of his flagship, the battleship Retribution, watching as dozens of ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. The sight would have been beautiful under different circumstances. But today it represented something far more serious than a military exercise. It represented the fury of an entire species. Admiral, all ships reporting ready status, his communications officer announced. The task force is at full strength and awaiting orders. Frank looked at the tactical display showing the crystal planet and its heavily defended moon. Somewhere in that research facility, 37 human children were waiting for rescue. He had promised their families he would bring them home. And he intended to keep that promise no matter what it cost. Open a channel to the Zephyrian High Council, Frank ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the crystal chamber where High Researcher Veltharos and his colleagues were meeting an emergency session. The aliens' crystalline faces showed no emotion, but Frank could sense their surprise at the size of the human fleet. I am Admiral Mitchell of the Human Colonial Fleet, Frank began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades in command. You have exactly 1 hour to release all human children in your custody and surrender yourselves to face charges for crimes against sentient beings. Veltharos tilted his angular head in what might have been curiosity. Admiral, your response seems disproportionate to the situation. We are conducting legitimate scientific research that will benefit the entire galaxy. The specimens are unharmed and will be returned when our studies are complete. They are not specimens, Frank replied, his voice growing harder. They are children with names and families and people who love them. And you have 59 minutes to return them safely. This reaction is illogical, another Zephyrian interjected. You risk interstellar war over 37 juvenile members of your species. The mathematical equation does not balance. Frank almost smiled at that comment. You're right, the math doesn't work. We're risking thousands of lives to save 37 children. But that's what makes us human. We don't abandon our young, no matter what the odds. While the diplomatic exchange continued on the main channel, Colonel Sarah Bennett was already leading her special operations team toward the lunar facility and stealth ships designed to avoid detection. Her soldiers were the best humanity had to offer, men and women who had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Remember, our primary objective is the children, Sarah told her team over the comm system. Everything else is secondary. We get them out alive and unharmed, whatever it takes. The stealth ships approached the moon from its dark side, using the natural shadow cast by the planet to mask their approach. The Zephyrian defense systems were impressive, but designed to detect conventional attacks from predictable angles. They had not planned for human creativity and determination. Chief Engineer Rick Barnes had spent days studying the facility's energy signatures and structural weaknesses. The main shields are powered by a central generator complex, he explained to Sarah's team. If we can create a controlled overload in their power grid, we'll have maybe 10 minutes before backup systems come online. 10 minutes to get 37 children out of a fortified alien research station, Sarah mused. It's going to be tight, but we've done harder things. Back on the Retribution, the hour deadline was approaching rapidly. Frank had hoped the Zephyrians would see reason and surrender peacefully, but it was becoming clear that their alien psychology made compromise impossible. "Admiral," Veltheros said from the planet's surface, "we are prepared to negotiate the return of some specimens in exchange for guarantees that our research will not be interfered with in the future." "Some specimens?" Frank's voice went dangerously quiet. "You mean some of our children?" "Yes, we could return perhaps half of them as a gesture of goodwill." Frank looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. Every person there understood what that offer meant. The aliens were willing to bargain with children's lives as if they were trading commodities. "Let me make something very clear," Frank said slowly. "In 30 seconds, this fleet is going to demonstrate why taking human children was the worst mistake your species has ever made. You can surrender now and face galactic justice, or you can try to fight us and face something much worse." "And what would that be?" Veltheros asked. "You'll face human parents who are very, very angry." The countdown reached 0 and Frank gave the order that would echo through galactic history. "All ships commence Operation Homecoming." The human fleet moved with precision that caught the Zephyrians completely off guard. While the main battle group engaged the planetary defense systems, Sarah's special operations team struck the lunar facility with surgical accuracy. The aliens' automated weapons were sophisticated, but programmed to fight conventional battles against logical opponents. They were not prepared for humans who would fly their ships through enemy fire to create openings for their teammates, or soldiers who would charge fortified positions because children were in danger. Sarah's team breached the facility's outer hull and fought their way through corridors filled with alien technology and confused researchers. The Zephyrians had never experienced violence before, and they had no idea how to respond to armed humans moving through their station with deadly purpose. "Contact, Chamber 7, came the voice of Sergeant Mike Torres over the comm. "I've got visual on the kids. They're scared, but they look okay." Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with renewed determination. "All teams converge on the central chambers. We're bringing everyone home." The rescue operation unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of violence and protection. Human soldiers cleared each chamber systematically, gathering the children and moving them toward the extraction point while holding off increasingly desperate Zephyrian attempts to stop them. Emma Collins looked up at the armored figure of Sergeant Torres with tears of joy streaming down her face. "I knew you would come," she whispered. "I told everyone you would come." "We never leave our people behind," Torres replied, scooping the 8-year-old into his arms. "Especially not our kids." Throughout the facility, similar scenes played out as soldiers found the other children. Peter Nash had been trying to reprogram an alien computer when the rescue team reached his chamber. Katie Murphy was still leading songs to keep the younger children calm. Tommy Chen had cried himself to sleep, but woke up smiling when he saw human faces. The extraction took exactly 8 minutes and 37 seconds, well within Rick Barnes's projected window. As the last child was loaded onto the rescue ship, Sarah gave the order to withdraw. Behind them, the Zephyrian facility's defense systems were finally coming back online. But it was too late. The children were safe. On the planet below, the Zephyrian High Council was discovering that their military technology was no match for human determination. The crystal cities that had stood for thousands of years were being systematically disabled by weapons designed not to kill, but to render resistance impossible. "We surrender," Veltheros announced over the communication channels. "Please cease your attack." Frank looked at the tactical display showing Zephyrian forces laying down their weapons across the planet.
"All ships stand down.
Maintain defensive positions but hold fire." The war that the Zephyrians had accidentally started was over almost before it began, but the consequences would reshape galactic politics for generations to come. Within hours, representatives from dozens of alien species arrived in the Zephyrian system to witness the aftermath. The speed and effectiveness of the human response had shocked civilizations that had considered humanity a minor player in galactic affairs. The Altarian ambassador approached Frank on the bridge of the Retribution, his ancient eyes filled with something that looked like newfound respect. "Admiral, your species has surprised us all," Velshan said quietly. "We had no idea humans were capable of such coordinated military action." "We're not usually a warlike people," Frank replied, "but threaten our children and you'll discover what we're really capable of." Back on the Kepler colony, Administrator Ben Hayes waited at the landing pad as the rescue ships approached. Parents who had spent days in agonized worry ran toward the landing craft before they had even touched the ground. Emma Collins jumped into her father's arms and held on as if she would never let go. "Daddy, I knew you'd come for us." "I told everyone you'd come." Her father, tears streaming down his face, held his daughter close and whispered, "We will always come for you. Always." The reunion scenes were repeated across the landing pad as 37 children were returned to their families. But the impact of what had happened extended far beyond one small colony. Within weeks, the Galactic Council established new laws protecting juvenile members of all species from non-consensual research. The Zephyrian Collective was placed under supervision and required to undergo what humans diplomatically called cultural education about the emotional bonds that most species shared. But more importantly, every civilization in the galaxy now understood a fundamental truth about humanity. They could be negotiated with, traded with, and